A single adult oyster filters 50 gallons of water every day. One animal, 50 gallons. The harbor those animals once built held 6 billion gallons, and for 10,000 years, they cleaned every drop of it without being asked. By 1965, not one of them was left. 2 centuries of commercial dredging stripped the reefs from the harbor floor. Industrial shipping demanded deeper channels, so engineers blasted what the dredges missed. Raw sewage, millions of gallons of it, discharged directly into tidal flows for decades, finished the job. The oxygen drained out of the water. The floor went dark. All 220,000 acres of living reef, representing nearly half the world's entire oyster population, collapsed into biological silence. What remained was not a harbor. It was a shipping canal wearing the geography of one. In this video, you will see what happened when 2 public school educators, operating with no engineering budget, no federal contract, and no maritime infrastructure, decided to put those oysters back. Researchers at the Urban Assembly New York Harbor School and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation have been tracking the biological response for over a decade. What their field data recorded will change how you think about the relationship between living organisms and the infrastructure cities spend billions of dollars trying to build. But there is one result in that data that took the research teams a full season to process because it had no precedent in the engineering literature. The oysters did not restore the harbor. They did something to the city's own infrastructure that the civil engineers who built it had never anticipated and cannot fully explain. That detail comes later. Hold it. Before there was a harbor, there was a reef. For 10,000 years, the eastern oyster, Crassostrea virginica, functioned as the primary biological infrastructure of New York's estuary. At peak abundance, wild reefs covered 220,000 acres of harbor floor. That figure represents nearly half of the entire global oyster population at the time, concentrated inside a single tidal basin. Every 3 days, without pumps, without treatment chemicals, without a municipal contract of any kind, that living architecture pulled the harbor's full 6 billion gallon volume through its collective gill membranes, stripping nitrogen, suspended sediment, and heavy metal compounds from the water entirely on its own. Then the dredges arrived. Commercial harvesting began dismantling the reefs in the mid-1800s, pulling shell mass faster than the colonies could regenerate. Industrial expansion compounded the damage. Deeper shipping channels required blasting through formations that had calcified over centuries. Each round of dredging loosened sediment that smothered the survivors below. Municipal wastewater systems, built for a fraction of the population they eventually served, discharged raw sewage directly into tidal flows for decades, stripping oxygen from the water column layer by layer. By the early 1960s, the process was complete. State biologists closed the ecological ledger formally. The eastern oyster was functionally extinct across all 5 New York City boroughs, not in decline, not diminished, absent. The harbor floor had become an anoxic channel, engineered, lightless, and biologically silent. What that silence was costing, the water would take another 60 years to fully calculate. The city had spent a century killing the harbor. It would take a high school to begin bringing it back. The engineering firms had no proposal. The federal agencies had no timeline. The answer, when it came, arrived from an unlikely address. Governor's Island sits in the upper harbor, decommissioned military land, largely quiet, and by 2008 home to a public maritime high school with no endowment and no engineering contract. Murray Fisher and Pete Malinowski were teachers. What they designed was not a government remediation program. It was a circular biological supply chain built almost entirely from materials the city was already discarding. The mechanism was disarmingly simple. Nearly 100 New York restaurants agreed to redirect their spent oyster shells, waste product destined for landfill, to a collection and curing operation on the island. Those shells sat in open air for 12 months, long enough for microscopic free-swimming larvae, called spat, to settle onto their surfaces and begin calcifying. Students from the harbor school then transferred the seeded shells into mobile hatchery tanks, raising juvenile oysters through their most vulnerable developmental window before the cages went into the water. Skeptics had reasonable grounds. Water quality in the harbor remained severely compromised, and early survival data was discouraging. Mortality rates in the first deployments ran high. Marine biologists raised a specific concern that was harder to dismiss. Filter feeders introduced into a contaminated system don't just clean the water. They concentrate whatever the water contains, accumulating heavy metals and industrial compounds in their tissue at rates that could outpace any ecological benefit. Those concerns were legitimate. They were also, as it turned out, only part of the picture. The question was never whether oysters could survive in New York Harbor. The question was what they would do once they did. What the researchers understood, and what the skeptics had underestimated, was the oyster's biology. A single adult Crassostrea virginica is not a passive organism. It is a pump. Water drawn continuously across its gill membranes surrenders phytoplankton, suspended particulates, nitrogen compounds, and heavy metal ions, either bound into the animal's shell matrix or deposited as dense, stable sediment onto the harbor floor beneath it. Field monitoring teams from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation measured this output directly under harbor conditions, not in controlled laboratory tanks. Their baseline figure, 50 gallons per animal per day, not a ceiling, a floor. Think about what that means at scale. 1 billion oysters, the Billion Oyster Project's declared long-term target, would collectively process 50 billion gallons every 24 hours. The harbor holds 6 billion. An unmanaged reef at full density would therefore purify the entire basin every 3 days without a single pump, treatment chemical, or maintenance contract. The infrastructure cost, zero. Researchers at the Urban Assembly New York Harbor School had been tracking juvenile survival rates, reef accretion data, and water clarity readings since the first cage deployments. Over successive seasons, survival rates climbed. Reef structures consolidated. Water clarity metrics moved faster than the models had projected, not dramatically, but measurably and ahead of schedule. Something beyond the planted cages was driving the recovery. The spring survey data from Staten Island's South Shore would take another full season to fully process, and when those results came back, they did not resemble anything in the engineering projections. New York was not alone in arriving at this conclusion through an accidental door. Along the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, reef restoration programs using the same recycled shell seeding method have begun stabilizing eroding marshland at rates that dredge and fill engineering, at considerably greater expense, could not sustain. Further north, in the Chesapeake Bay, coordinated rebuilding efforts are generating nitrogen reduction metrics that outpace state-funded chemical treatment programs by measurable margins. Neither result was guaranteed at the outset. Both emerged from the same foundational decision: return the animal, provide substrate, and withdraw. The intervention, in every case, is the act of restraint. What these sites had not yet demonstrated, what no other location had produced at comparable scale, was the autonomous structural upgrade of existing human infrastructure. That single data point from Staten Island's South Shore changed the category of the question entirely. Reef restoration had always been framed as ecological repair. The living breakwaters data suggested something more disruptive, that biological colonization could functionally improve engineered coastal defenses without any deliberate design. Every seawall in a degraded estuary suddenly looked different, not as a finished structure, as a candidate. The institutions had not yet agreed on what to do with that, but before they could formalize a response, the harbor itself rendered the debate academic. There is a particular kind of humility that data eventually forces on institutions that have resisted it. This is not a story about oysters. It is a story about what happens when a system is allowed to remember what it was and what human management costs when it substitutes concrete for the organisms that built the original architecture. The harbor did not recover because anyone designed a recovery. It recovered because two educators returned the animal that had always done the work and then got out of the way. What the Billion Oyster Project proved in filtration data, in structural accretion readings, in the spontaneous reappearance of seahorses and mud crabs in channels that had been biologically inert for 60 years, is a single, uncomfortable truth. Ecological recovery is not something we engineer. It is something we permit. In our next case file, we move from New York Harbor to the Great Lakes, specifically to Lake Michigan, which by the early 1990s had been formally designated as ecologically terminal by federal fisheries panels. $12 billion in chemical and mechanical intervention had failed to reverse the collapse. What reversed it instead was a species nobody was watching, a despised bottom feeder called the round goby, and an unlikely duck that nobody had included in any trophic model. Together, they executed a biological correction that 3 decades of state science had declared impossible. That file opens next. If what gets recovered matters to you as much as what gets lost, subscribe and share this investigation. This is the audience that pays attention to both sides of that ledger. One adult oyster filters 50 gallons of water every day, and somewhere beneath the surface of the most industrialized waterway in North America, 150 million of them are already doing what the engineers said couldn't be done.